The roar hit me first. Not just sound, but a physical thing. A wave of noise and heat rolling off the packed crowd in the ballroom. We'd won. Against the odds, against the money, against the sneering certainty of people who thought guys like me didn't belong, we'd actually won. I was going to Congress. My hand ached from shaking what felt like 1,000 others. Plastered smile, check. Nodding appreciatively, check. Then I saw them, slicing through the celebratory chaos like sharks through chum Clara, my wife, looking pale but relieved, flanked by her parents, Richard and Eleanor Sterling. Their faces, usually masks of polite, barely concealed condescension when looking at me, were split into enormous, beaming smiles. It was jarring, like seeing statues suddenly grin. Before I could brace myself, Eleanor was upon me, her bony fingers latching onto my arm, her diamond rings digging into my bicep. The flashbulbs popped, catching the glitter. "Our congressman," she announced, her voice carrying over the din. "Our congressman, not Alex. Not even Clara's husband, who somehow lucked into this. But ours, like they'd just acquired a prize racehorse. A chill, cold and sharp, cut through the sweaty euphoria of the room. The cheap champagne smell suddenly seemed cloying, the victory air thick and hard to breathe. This wasn't acceptance. Oh no, this was ownership. This was the moment the gilded cage, the one they'd always tried to keep me out of, was finally snapping shut around me. This felt colder, more calculated than any sneer they'd ever aimed my way. Later, the noise faded, replaced by the clink of ice in heavy crystal glasses. We were at the Sterling penthouse, a sterile palace in the sky overlooking the glittering city sprawl. The neon signs from buildings below cast long, shifting stripes across the polished marble floors. Richard Sterling, my father-in-law, cornered me by the massive windows. He swirled his amber brandy, the ice cubes knocking together like tiny, ominous bells. "Son," he started, the word feeling foreign and transactional on his lips. "Now that you're heading to Washington." He paused, taking a slow sip. "There's a small matter of deregulation in the energy sector we need to discuss." My stomach tightened. We weren't even 24 hours past the win. He forged on, oblivious or maybe just uncaring. "Vital for the economy, you understand. Growth, jobs." He finally met my eye, his gaze sharp and proprietary. "And frankly, vital for us. Sterling Industries stands to benefit significantly." There it was. No preamble, no subtlety. Just the raw demand, wrapped in a thin tissue of patriotic concern. Across the vast, silent room, I felt Clara's eyes on me. Anxious. Pleading, maybe? I couldn't tell. I just gave a slow, non-committal nod. What else could I do right then? The weight of their sudden, conditional approval felt heavier than the entire campaign. Richard smiled, a satisfied, predatory curve of the lips. He mistook my silence for surrender. Typical. "Good," he said, clapping me lightly on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like marking territory than affection. "We'll draft some points for you, get you up to speed." He turned away then, satisfied, already moving on to his next conquest or conversation, leaving me staring out at the city lights that suddenly felt less like jewels and more like the bars of a cage. Hours later, back in the sterile guest suite they kept for us. Never our room, always the guest suite. The silence stretched between Clara and me, thick and uncomfortable. She was perched on the edge of an antique chaise lounge, nervously smoothing the silk of her dress. "Daddy's just enthusiastic, Alex," she offered finally, her voice small. "He's proud. He wants to help." I turned from the window. Help himself, Clara? Is that what this is? The question hung in the air, sharp and unwelcome. She flinched, looking away. The scent of her expensive French perfume, usually intoxicating, felt heavy, suffocating. "They just want what's best." She trailed off, her fingers twisting in her lap. For everyone, for the family. I saw it then, clear as day. The impossible position she was in, torn between the parents who'd raised her in this world of privilege and expectation, and the husband who'd just gate-crashed it. She wasn't just my wife. She was potentially their best leverage. I realized with a sinking heart that my fight wasn't just going to be against Richard and Eleanor. It might be against Clara's deep-seated need for their approval, too. The cage wasn't just gilded. It had layers. And I was right in the middle. How was I going to navigate this without losing everything, including maybe her? Thinking back, it seems almost inevitable, this clash. My world and theirs were never meant to intersect, let alone collide head-on through marriage and politics. My childhood smelled like hot asphalt after a summer rain, tasted like the slightly burnt coffee my dad drank before his early shift at the plant, sounded like the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night. We lived in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, worn furniture kept meticulously clean, neighbors who knew each other, shared struggles and small victories. My parents weren't rich or famous. Their currency was different. Hard work, honesty, looking out for your neighbors. Dad always said, "Your name, Alex, your integrity, that's the only thing you truly own. Don't sell it cheap." Mom volunteered at the local community center, helping immigrants learn English. They pushed me in school, not because they wanted me to climb some social ladder, but because they believed education was the path to making a real difference, to serving the community that had always supported us. Money was tight, but the foundation was solid rock. Then came college, and Clara. It felt like stepping into a different dimension. I met her at a debate club tournament. I was arguing passionately about inner-city reinvestment. She was supposed to be on the opposing team but seemed more interested in my points than her own notes. She was luminous, intelligent, with a quick laugh that cut through the stuffy formality of the event. But she also carried an air of caution, like she wasn't entirely comfortable in her own expensive skin. We started talking, then studying together. Late nights in the campus library, fueled by lukewarm coffee from a vending machine, surrounded by the comforting, dusty smell of old books. She was fascinated by my life, my perspective. It was so different from the entitled legacy kids she grew up with. For her, I was exotic, maybe. For me, she was brilliant and funny, and for a while, her background didn't seem to matter. We were just Alex and Clara, two people finding a connection that felt real, away from the expectations that shadowed her. I remember one night, walking her back to her dorm through a light drizzle, sharing an umbrella, feeling like we were in our own little world. That world shattered the first time I went for dinner at the Sterling Mansion. Mansion isn't even the right word. It was a fortress of wealth and judgment. Polished marble floors reflected dazzling chandeliers. Silent, uniformed staff hovered. The air itself felt different, rarefied, heavy with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and old money. Richard and Eleanor Sterling were exactly as I'd feared, only more polished, their condescension delivered with surgical precision. Richard, tall and imposing, grilled me about my prospects with the air of a man inspecting livestock. Public interest law? He'd mused, swirling his wine. Commendable, I suppose. Doesn't pay the bills, though, does it? Eleanor, draped in pearls and icy smiles, chimed in with questions about my family, her inquiries dripping with implications. And your mother volunteers? How quaint. Every compliment was backhanded, every smile tight. The gourmet food, served on plates probably worth more than my dad's monthly paycheck, tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I felt Clara shrinking beside me, trying desperately to smooth things over, her efforts only highlighting the vast, unbridgeable gap between her world and mine. I saw the disappointment in her parents' eyes, not just in me, but in her, for choosing me. That dinner set the tone for years. They never overtly forbade Clara from seeing me. That would have been too crude, too obvious. Instead, it was a campaign of subtle erosion. Richard would occasionally offer me insultingly junior positions at his company, framed as helping me out. Eleanor would drop comments to Clara about old boyfriends from good families, sighing dramatically about how different things could have been. Praise, when it came, was always qualified. Alex is earnest, they might concede, the word hanging there like a polite insult. The feeling of being constantly judged, weighed, and found wanting became a familiar companion whenever they were around. The scent of Eleanor's signature perfume started triggering a knot in my stomach. Richard's dismissive hand waves when I talked about my work felt like tiny slaps. Clara was perpetually caught in the crossfire, trying to mediate, trying to belong in both worlds, succeeding in neither. I'll never forget the day before our wedding. Clara was showing her mother her dress. I walked in to hear Eleanor sigh, running a critical eye over the simple, elegant gown Clara had chosen. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice laced with a familiar, weary resignation, "I suppose love is blind. And penniless." She hadn't seen me standing in the doorway. Clara's face crumpled for a second before she smoothed it over. But I saw it. And I knew, right then, their approval was a fortress I'd likely never breach. I just didn't realize I wouldn't want to, eventually, or that they'd one day pretend the walls were never there. Years passed. Clara and I built a life, mostly separate from her parents' orbit. We had our own apartment, small, but ours. I was working long hours at a non-profit legal aid center, handling cases for people who reminded me of where I came from. It was challenging, often heartbreaking, but fulfilling. Still, I saw the bigger picture systemic problems that needed systemic solutions. Band-aids weren't enough. Then came the issue with the old Wellman chemical plant on the east side, near my old neighborhood. It had been closed for years, but toxic runoff was leaching into the groundwater. Kids were getting sick. The current congressman, a slick old-timer deep in the pocket of corporate donors, paid lip service but did nothing. Anger simmered in the community, a low, frustrated hum. One evening, staring at a map outlining the contamination plume, something clicked, or maybe snapped. "I should run against him," I said out loud, mostly to myself. Clara looked up from her book, startled. "Run? For Congress?" "Yeah. Someone has to actually do something, Clara. He's owned by guys like—" I stopped myself before saying your father. "By corporate interests. He doesn't care about those people." I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly masked by support. "Alex, that's— wow, a big step. Can you win?" "Probably not," I admitted honestly. "He's got a massive war chest, name recognition." I looked back at the map, at the streets I knew, the families facing this. But I have to try. Her apprehension was understandable. This wasn't just taking on an incumbent. It was stepping directly into the line of fire of the world her parents represented. But she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, Alex, I'm with you." Announcing my candidacy was humbling. We held a press conference in the drafty back room of the community center where my mom used to volunteer. Stale coffee brewed in a sputtering machine. A handful of local bloggers, a stringer for the city paper, maybe 24 supporters holding handmade signs. It felt worlds away from the polished, catered events the incumbent held. The scent was pure desperation, mixed with hope. The Sterling's reaction was swift and exactly what I expected. First, stunned silence. Then, barely veiled mockery. Richard called, his voice dripping with amusement. Congress? Alex, be serious. It takes money, connections, things you simply don't have. It's a pipe dream, son. Don't embarrass Clara. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Richard, I said dryly, and hung up. The campaign was pure grind. Endless days bleeding into sleepless nights. We had no money for TV ads, no budget for fancy consultants. Our headquarters was a donated storefront with patchy Wi-Fi. Our car was my aging sedan, smelling perpetually of stale coffee and the cheap vinyl seats sticking to my legs in the summer heat. But we had people, volunteers who believed. We knocked on thousands of doors, held town halls and church basements and school gyms, listened to people who hadn't felt heard in years. I talked about the chemical plant, about healthcare costs, about jobs leaving the district. I connected with people because I was one of them. I understood the gnawing anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck, the frustration of feeling ignored by the powerful. Slowly, painstakingly, we started building momentum. Small donations trickled in. More volunteers showed up. There was a buzz, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, the underdog had a shot. Of course, the Sterlings couldn't just stand by and watch. Their interference was subtle, designed to wound, not kill, seemingly. Richard made sure to prominently attend a high-dollar fundraiser for my opponent, photos splashing across the society pages. Eleanor, I heard through Clara, was telling her friends the campaign was a terribly stressful, misguided adventure that was causing the family no end of embarrassment. They dripped poison into Clara's ear constantly, questioning my judgment, my chances, the strain on our finances and their precious family name. Then came the article in the city paper, a skeptical analysis piece, filled with quotes questioning my experience, my temperament, my fitness for office. It quoted an anonymous family source expressing deep concern about my quixotic quest. I didn't need a detective to figure out who whispered that particular poison into the reporter's ear. Eleanor's perfume practically wafted off the newsprint. They weren't just disapproving anymore. They were actively trying to kneecap me. The gloves were off. But it only made me more determined to prove them, and everyone like them, wrong. Election night. The donated storefront headquarters buzzed like a kicked beehive. The air hung thick with the smell of cheap pizza, nervous sweat, and the almost unbearable tension of hope stretched thin. Every time the door opened, letting in the cool November air and another volunteer stamping their feet, heads would swivel, searching for news, for a sign. I felt hollowed out, running on fumes and adrenaline. Weeks of non-stop campaigning, shaking hands, giving speeches, surviving on caffeine and sheer willpower had taken their toll. Doubt, a cold and unwelcome guest, gnawed at the edges of my mind. Had Richard been right? Was this whole thing just a naive pipe dream? Clara stood beside me, her hand gripping mine so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face was pale, her eyes huge, reflecting the flickering images from the news channel playing on the mounted TV. The pundits droned on, calling the race for the incumbent early, then backtracking as the first results trickled in from precincts we'd fought hard for. Too close to call, one of them finally admitted, sounding surprised. A ripple of excitement went through the room. Too close to call? Against him? Whispers turned into buzzes. People leaned closer to the TV. Phones came out, refreshing election websites frantically. Flashbacks hit me. Richard's dismissive laugh, Eleanor's pitying glances, the anonymous family source in the paper. Anger, cold and sharp, mingled with the hope. We could actually do this. Then the momentum shifted. Key districts, working-class neighborhoods, The areas around the poisoned plant, they came in strong for us, stronger than anyone predicted. The mood in the room exploded. Cautious optimism turned into jubilant disbelief. Volunteers who'd poured their hearts into this campaign for months were weeping, hugging, shouting. The impossible was happening. On TV, the pundits were scrambling, their faces a mixture of shock and grudging respect. And then the call. The network anchor, looking stunned, declared our victory. A narrow margin, but decisive. Pandemonium. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over the room, lifting everyone off their feet. Someone shoved me towards the makeshift podium. I remember babbling thanks, my voice hoarse, promising to fight for every single person in the district, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. I scanned the ecstatic faces, searching for Clara. I found her, tears streaming down her face. Relief, joy, or something more complicated? That's when I saw them. Richard and Eleanor Sterling, appearing as if summoned by the victory announcement itself. Parting the sea of cheering volunteers like royalty, their faces alight with those unsettlingly broad smiles. And Eleanor's hand clamped onto my arm, her voice ringing out with that chillingly possessive phrase, "Our congressman." The cheers suddenly sounded distant. The victory felt tarnished. In that instant, surrounded by the raw, hopeful energy of the people who'd believed in me, I saw the Sterlings not as family by marriage, but as the embodiment of the power structures I'd just fought so hard against. Their sudden embrace wasn't a truce, it was a tactical shift. Richard's demand later that night, about the energy deregulation, confirmed it. It wasn't even subtle. The mask of disapproval was gone, replaced by the mask of manipulation. As Eleanor pulled Clara aside for an urgent, whispered conference across the penthouse living room, I watched Clara nod, a troubled, uncertain look clouding her features. What had Eleanor said? What promise had my wife just made to her mother, caught between relief at my victory and the weight of her parents' renewed, focused expectations? The fight wasn't over. It had just entered a newer, perhaps more insidious phase. The calls started almost immediately after I got to Washington. Richard Sterling, suddenly my biggest confidant. "Alex, just checking in. How's settling in?" Followed quickly by, "Now about that energy bill." Then came the lobbyists, smooth operators smelling of expensive cologne and entitlement sent by Sterling Industries. They laid out the case for the tax cuts Richard wanted. Complex charts, projections, buzzwords like synergy and pro-growth. Eleanor played her part too, mostly through Clara. "Darling, your father is just trying to help Alex navigate the complexities. He has so much experience." The pressure was constant. A low hum beneath the surface of every family call, every polite inquiry. They expected me to fall in line, the grateful upstart finally seeing the wisdom of their ways. They pushed hard for me to champion a specific amendment to a major tax bill making its way through committee. It was cleverly worded, designed to look like a general business incentive, but the primary beneficiary. Companies structured exactly like Sterling Industries. Richard personally walked me through the finer points, acting like a benevolent mentor. In meetings with him and his DC lawyers, I listened intently, nodded, asked clarifying questions, took notes. I projected cautious interest, maybe even compliance. The air in those sterile Capitol Hill meeting rooms always felt cold, recycled, smelling faintly of power and stale coffee. "I upheld my duty to my constituents and to responsible governance, Richard," I replied calmly, keeping my voice even. "The amendment ensures the benefits go to companies playing by the rules." I didn't mention his company specifically. I didn't have to. He knew. The calculated passivity followed by a precise, unexpected strike. It threw him completely off balance. A few niche publications even ran small pieces praising the freshman congressman's principled stand on corporate responsibility. Round one to me, but I felt Eleanor's icy disapproval radiating all the way from New York through Clara's strained voice on our next call. "Mother thinks you're playing a dangerous game, Alex. She says you don't understand how things work here." Oh, I was beginning to understand perfectly. Next came Eleanor's charm offensive, DC style. "Alex, darling, we simply must host a proper reception for you, introduce you to everyone who matters." She planned a lavish gala at a swanky hotel, assuring me it was crucial for my networking. The guest list she sent was a who's who of corporate lobbyists, conservative think tank heads, and old money power brokers, precisely the bubble Richard and Eleanor lived in, the people they wanted influencing me. "Of course, Eleanor," I agreed readily. "Sounds wonderful. I appreciate you doing this." Again, the compliant, slightly naive newcomer persona. My countermove, I requested adding a few names to the guest list. "Just some key people from back home, Eleanor. Community leaders, folks who worked hard on the campaign. It would mean a lot to them." She couldn't easily refuse without looking snobbish. So, on the night of the gala, amidst the glitterati sipping champagne and nibbling canapes that smelled faintly of truffle oil and entitlement, arrived my contingent. The head of the local environmental action group fighting the Wellman plant, the president of the district's largest labor union, a fiery tenants' rights advocate from my old neighborhood, even my high school civics teacher, who'd first inspired my interest in public service. I spent the evening not hobnobbing with Eleanor's chosen few, but actively introducing my guests to hers. "Senator, I'd love for you to meet Maria. She's leading the fight for clean water back in my district." "Mr. CEO, this is Tom. He represents thousands of workers your company employs. Perhaps you could discuss their pension concerns?" The conversations were, interesting. Awkward pauses punctuated the polite murmur. The clash of worlds was palpable. The scent of Eleanor's expensive perfume seemed to recoil from the earnest passion of my guests. The fallout. Eleanor was incandescent with rage, though she maintained a brittle smile throughout the evening. The society columns the next day described the event with barely concealed amusement as ideologically eclectic and featuring some unexpected pairings. The Sterlings' attempt to curate my influences and showcase me as their tamed congressman had backfired spectacularly. They looked controlling and slightly ridiculous. Clara cornered me later that night, her eyes flashing. "Why, Alex? Why would you embarrass Mom like that? Those people, they didn't belong there." "Didn't belong?" I kept my voice low. "They're the people I represent, Clara. They belong anywhere I am. Was your mother embarrassed by me or by the reality of who elected me?" She had no answer, just turned away, the gulf between us widening. The Sterlings were furious now, feeling mocked and defied. I sensed their next move would be more direct, more vicious. Richard started making calls, leveraging his business network, trying to dig up dirt. Anything to discredit me or gain leverage. He assumed I was still just the working-class kid, punching above his weight, vulnerable. He didn't know my time in public interest law had taught me how to watch my back and how to gather information quietly. The twist reveal. What Richard didn't know was that my old law school mentor, Judge Harrison, a widely respected, semi-retired federal judge known for his fierce integrity and quiet influence, had taken a keen interest in my campaign and my work in Congress. He despised the kind of entitled power the Sterlings wielded. After the election, he'd reached out. "Alex," he'd said over coffee that smelled reassuringly strong and uncomplicated, "you're going into the belly of the beast. Let me know if you need resources, connections that money can't buy, but integrity can. He'd become a quiet source of advice and, crucially, connected me with ethical donors and experienced political operatives who valued principle over pedigree. This network provided me with a level of support and strategic insight the Sterlings couldn't fathom and couldn't touch. Furthermore, sensing the Sterlings might eventually resort to dirty tricks after the gala fiasco, I'd asked a trusted contact, an investigative journalist I knew from my legal aid days, to discreetly look into Sterling Industries' less public dealings, specifically around government contracts Richard had secured over the years. The information came back just as Richard started sniffing around for dirt on me. It wasn't just environmental corner-cutting. It was potential bribery related to securing a lucrative defense contract years ago. Emails, bank transfers. Potentially explosive. I didn't need to leak it. Not yet. At the next tense family dinner, hosted by a reluctant Clara trying to broker peace, Richard started pontificating about ethical leadership. I waited for a pause, then casually asked, "Speaking of contracts, Richard, I was reading about the procurement process for the old Triton defense deal back in 08. Fascinating stuff. Did Sterling have any involvement in that?" The blood drained from Richard's face. Eleanor froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. Clara looked confused. Richard stammered something incoherent. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly, irreversibly. I hadn't made an accusation, just asked an informed question, but he knew that I knew, or at least that I knew enough to be dangerous. The hunter had become the hunted. Desperate now, cornered and realizing I wasn't the easy mark they'd assumed, they played their last, dirtiest card. An anonymous blog post appeared, then got picked up by a right-wing news aggregator. It alleged campaign finance irregularities, minor technical violations twisted into a narrative of deliberate corruption, fabricated quotes, misleading timelines. It was designed to trigger an ethics investigation, to bog me down, to tarnish my reputation. They thought they were clever, using shell accounts and untraceable IP addresses. They didn't know about Judge Harrison's network or my journalist contact who specialized in digital forensics. My final countermove. I appeared blindsided, issuing a standard denial while expressing shock at the allegations. Internally, I was anything but. My journalist contact, armed with the information Harrison's people helped uncover about the digital trail leading back to a known Sterling associate, traced the smear campaign's origins. It wasn't ironclad proof for court, perhaps, but more than enough for a bombshell news story. I gave her the green light. I stayed silent publicly. The fallout. 2 days later, a major newspaper ran a front-page exposé detailing how associates linked to Richard Sterling had orchestrated the anonymous smear campaign against me. They published screenshots, traced financial links. The story exploded. The narrative wasn't about my alleged misdeeds anymore. It was about a powerful billionaire trying to destroy a congressman who wouldn't bend to his will. The public outcry was immense. Calls for investigations into Sterling Industries intensified. Richard and Eleanor were engulfed in a firestorm of their own making. They were exposed, humiliated, and panicking. Checkmate. The phone call came a week after the exposé blew up. It wasn't Richard or Eleanor, it was Clara. Her voice was thin, strained. "They want to talk to you, Alex. Both of them. They asked me to ask you." "Talk about what, Clara?" "Just talk, please. They're not doing well." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not at their penthouse, not on neutral ground. My office, my territory. They arrived looking diminished. Richard's usual arrogant stride was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his face gray and puffy. Eleanor, usually radiating icy control, seemed brittle, her eyes darting nervously around my modest, functional office. The scent of stale coffee and old files, the scent of my actual work, seemed to make them uncomfortable. Gone was the overwhelming perfume of power and privilege. Clara sat between them on the small couch, looking miserable. Richard cleared his throat. "Alex," he began, his voice raspy. Eleanor and I, we wanted to apologize." It sounded rehearsed, painful. "We perhaps overstepped, misunderstood." Eleanor picked up the thread, her voice tight. "We were concerned. As parents, you have to understand. We only ever wanted what was best." Best for who? The question hung unspoken in the air. We acted out of misplaced protection for Clara, for the family name. It was a masterclass in non-apology apologies, blaming parental concern, misunderstanding, anything but their own greed and hubris. They talked about reconciliation, about putting this unfortunate business behind us, about moving forward as a family. As if family was a switch they could just flip back on, now that their other tactics had failed. Clara turned to me then, her eyes swimming with tears. "Alex, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Can't we just stop? Accept their apology? For me? They're still my parents. This is tearing me apart." Her pain was real, palpable, and it hit me hard. This was the collateral damage of their war, Clara caught in the middle, wounded by loyalty to both sides. For a moment, I wavered. Could I do it? For her? Pretend to accept, smooth things over, maintain the facade. I looked at Richard and Eleanor, saw the calculation still flickering behind their penitent expressions, saw the expectation that ultimately I would fold, that the lure of their world, their conditional acceptance, would be enough. Saw the lifetime of compromises stretching ahead, if I said yes. I took a deep breath. The air in my office suddenly felt clean, clear. I knew what I had to do. I turned to them, my voice quiet but firm. No anger, no triumph, just clarity. "I hear what you're saying, and I understand you find yourselves in a difficult position." I paused, letting the silence settle. "But your actions weren't about misplaced concern. They were about control, about trying to use my position for your own gain, just like you always use your wealth and influence." Richard started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I don't wish you ill, but a relationship based on manipulation, on conditional approval depending on whether I serve your interests, that's not something I want or need. My loyalty is here." I gestured around the office, meaning the work, the people I represented. "It's to my constituents, to the principles I ran on, not to your ambitions or your bank account." I looked directly at Richard, then Eleanor. "So, no." The word, spoken softly, landed with the force of a gavel. Simple, unequivocal, final. "No, I don't accept your apology because I don't believe it's sincere. No, we can't just move forward as a family as if nothing happened. The trust is broken, irreparably." Richard stared, mouth agape. Eleanor looked like I'd slapped her. Clara let out a small, choked sob, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Clara," I said gently, my heart aching for her. "Truly sorry for the pain this causes you, but I can't compromise who I am or why I'm here, not even for you." They left soon after, defeated. Richard didn't say another word, just walked out like an old man. Eleanor shot me a look of pure venom before following him. Clara hesitated, torn, then walked out with her parents, casting one last, heartbroken look back at me. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the sudden, profound silence. Standing there, looking out the window at the Capitol dome gleaming in the afternoon sun, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for Clara, for the final, painful severing of ties. But relief, Deep and cleansing washed over me, too. The weight of their expectations, their disapproval, their conditional acceptance, it was finally lifted. I was free, but the cost was high. What now? For my career, sure, but more importantly, for my marriage? Had I just chosen my principles over my wife? The silence in the office felt vast, echoing with the questions. 5 years. That's how long it's been since that final, quiet no echoed in my office. 5 years is a lifetime in politics, and a lifetime in healing, too. Washington, D.C. is still a beast, but I've learned how to navigate it without selling my soul. I'm finishing my 3rd term now. Still in the same slightly too small office, still drinking questionable coffee. But we've gotten things done. We passed the Wellman Plant Cleanup Act, securing federal funds to deal with the toxic legacy that drove me to run in the first place. Seeing remediation crews finally breaking ground back home, smelling the turned earth instead of chemical residue on the breeze, felt like a victory far sweeter than any election night. I'm known, I think, for being independent. Maybe a little stubborn. Definitely not flashy. I've built alliances based on shared goals, not backroom deals brokered over expensive dinners. My staunchest allies are often people the Sterlings would dismiss: activists, union leaders, other reps from districts more like mine than theirs. Judge Harrison still calls occasionally, offering sage advice and dry wit. His belief in me was a lifeline back then. The Sterling name doesn't carry the same weight it used to. The scandal surrounding the smear campaign led to further investigations. Richard faced hefty fines and stepped down from running the company day to day. They sold the penthouse, retreated to a quieter, less public life. Their power, once seemingly absolute, proved fragile when exposed to the light. Their footnotes now, cautionary tales whispered at D.C. cocktail parties I rarely attend. I hear about them occasionally, usually through neutral acquaintances. They exist somewhere out there, but they are no longer a gravitational force in my universe. Their shadow has lifted. And Clara? That's the question people sometimes cautiously ask. She didn't leave with her parents that day. She stayed. It was hard, incredibly hard. There were months of strained silence, tears, difficult conversations that went late into the night. She had to mourn the relationship she thought she had with her parents, the version of them she'd needed them to be. I had to understand the depth of her loyalty, the pain my choices inflicted, even if they were necessary. We found our way back, slowly. Therapy helped. Honesty helped more. Our foundation now isn't built on ignoring the chasm between my background and hers, but on acknowledging it, respecting it, and building a bridge across it based on mutual respect and shared values, the ones that drew us together in the first place, back when we were just Alex and Clara sharing bad coffee in the library. Last weekend, we drove out to the coast. We walked along the beach, the cold Atlantic wind whipping our hair, the salty spray sharp on our faces. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore felt like a cleansing sound. No agenda, no pressure, just us. Comfortable silence, easy laughter. It felt peaceful, earned. Sometimes, standing on my apartment balcony overlooking the city, not a penthouse view, but mine, I think about the path here. I never set out to become the man they couldn't ignore out of spite. It happened because I refused to become the man they wanted me to be. Approval, I learned, isn't worth chasing if the price is your own integrity. Real power isn't about wealth or connections. It's about staying true to your purpose, serving something larger than yourself. The city lights glitter below, a familiar, comforting sight now. Not cage bars, just lights. I breathe in the cool night air. It feels clean, full of possibility. My own.